one of the things I'm learning to do, and that I think is a valuable thing to learn to do, is to pay attention in such a way that things that show up in your life, that you notice them showing up with the idea that it may not be accidental that they're showing up. It may be that there is a synchronicity, that it may be that life is harmonious in the sense that wherever you are in this process of learning and practicing, that things will come into your life that are there because they're the things that you need to deal with. They're the things that will allow you to practice whatever might be the next lesson for you. May show up in your life and you may not notice that it's there. You may just disregard it and be paying attention to other things. And a lot of times, if that's the case, it will keep showing up until you give it the attention that it is asking for. And so if you understand that, for example, I had a book. It was one of Balsakar's books. And one day when I was in my office, just before I went to sleep, I picked the book up and took it to the bedroom and put it on the night table, with the idea that it would be good to have a book there in case I wanted to read before I went to sleep and so forth. But that book sat on the night table for months, and I never touched it. Every night I would go to bed, I would see it, I would go to bed, and I just never touched it. And then one night, I noticed it was there, and I picked it up, and I started reading. I just opened the book. Sometimes that's the way to find out what the book wants to teach you, is to just open the book and start reading. So I just opened the book, and the page that I opened it to and started reading was so absolutely perfect and relevant to where I was in my practice and in my life. And then it occurred to me, well, that book's been sitting there waiting for me to pick it up and read this for months now, right? So maybe it's a good idea to see if you can practice paying attention in such a way that whatever's occurring in your life might be part of a master plan, might be part of, it's not there by accident, it's there because it's something that if you give it your attention and ask what's happening, why is this there, what's it have to offer me? You may discover that it's presenting you with an opportunity to learn. So this morning, something like that happened. I saw something, and I related to it that way. Okay, maybe this is what there is to talk about today in the class. And so it was something that I saw on the computer. So I printed it, and this is what it was. When a cat falls out of a tree, it lets go of itself. The cat becomes completely relaxed and lands lightly on the ground. But if a cat were about to fall out of a tree and suddenly made up its mind that it didn't want to fall, it would become tense and rigid and would be just a bag of broken bones upon landing. In the same way, it is the philosophy of the Tao, and for any of you who don't know what the Tao is, the Tao Te Ching is a teaching by Lao Tse, a famous master, and the Tao is called the way. The Tao, you could say the Tao is the way it is. The flow of reality is called the Tao. In the same way, it is the philosophy of the Tao that we are all falling off a tree at every moment of our lives. As a matter of fact, the moment we were born, we were kicked off a precipice, and we are falling, and there is nothing that can stop it. So instead of living in a state of chronic tension and clinging to all sorts of things that are actually falling with us, because the whole world is impermanent, be like a cat. So that's Alan Watts. So that's a practice, because you might answer to that by saying, yeah, sounds good, right? But when things happen in my life, first of all, I'm probably not going to remember that. And secondly, when things happen in my life, I don't have much to say about the fact that my body tenses up. I don't have much to say about my mind rails against it. And the way we're conditioned is when something's coming at us that might hit us, right? We brace against it, which is the worst thing you can do. In judo, when they teach you how to fall, what do they teach you? Go with the fall, relax, roll when you hit the floor, right? So this is a way of living that's being spoken of here, and it's not something that is the way we're conditioned to be, because we're conditioned to resist and be in control and try and change things. And that's unnatural, just like it's natural for the cat to be that way. It's natural for us to be like the cat if we practice not being the way we're conditioned to be, which is to try and stop and resist and control, and instead let everything be as it is. There was a story that I heard recently about a guy who was hanging from a cliff and was going to fall, and he needed some help. He was calling, anybody up there that can help me? And finally a voice occurred, and he said, "Oh, thank you, who are you?" And the voice said, "God." And he said, "Oh, God, great, God, help me, tell me what to do." And God said, "Okay, I'll tell you what to do." And he said, "Okay, what?" And God said, "Let go." And he said, "Is anybody else up there?" And that's the way we are, We even when we hear the truth, it's like, well, that's not the way I understand it. I want it to be the way I think it should be. I want it to be the way I was taught it should be. Fight, resist. And that's just not consistent with reality. So this is a practice, and it's something that it's like when you go to float in the water, right? If you stiffen your body, you sink. But if you just let go and relax, the body will allow you to float. The water will allow you to float. So this is a practice. This is what we're doing when we're practicing meditation, is we're practicing letting go. We're practicing letting go of the impressions that come and play in our mind, the neural patterns that come up as we go through life and we encounter situations that bring up resistance, that bring up rejection, that bring up compulsive thoughts, that bring up emotions that are uncomfortable. And so the way we deal with that, the knee-jerk reaction that we have to things, is to try and stop it, try and escape from it. And in the free fall of life that we're all experiencing, one of the reasons that we're so automatically bracing and resisting as we're falling, and trying to grab and hold on to things as we're going through our lives and time, right? We're trying to stop this process of happening, because at the end of the process, we're going to hit the ground. This is called death, right? So through the way in life, we're trying to hold on to things that might allow this process to stop. We're trying to resist things that come in our way to keep from falling. And the reality of it is, as Alan Watts said, all that stuff's falling with us. So there is no success to be had by trying to hold on to anything. Everything's falling with us. Well, what these teachings allow us to discover is that we can't afford to let go And why can we afford to let go? Because in the teachings, it tells us that if we practice these teachings the way they're meant to be done, if we move our attention from the thinking activity, which is conditioned, which is where the resistance shows up, which is where the analysis of life occurs, which is where the justifications and explanations show up, and the self-righteousness and all the good ideas and knowledge about how to do life shows up. And when we're practicing meditation, we're practicing moving away from that over to this other experience of awareness of the body breathing. And this awareness of the body breathing experience is an awareness of the possibility of what's called transcendental wisdom. Transcendental wisdom. In other words, the wisdom is not like trying to use what we know to live. No, the wisdom is the idea that we can be wise and experience the possibility of transcendence, going beyond, seeing that the truth is beyond these temporary forms that are occurring. And when we see that, and when we begin to experience the nature of the truth, one of the things that starts to become apparent, not like a concept or an idea, but actually an experience, one of the things that becomes apparent is that our true nature is spiritual. Our true nature is not physical. And when we realize that transcendental wisdom, the things that we were afraid of, that we thought we had to try and control, show up as nothing but appearances. They're just appearances. They're not real. And therefore, there's nothing to be afraid of. And one of the things that becomes apparent in transcendental wisdom is that death doesn't actually exist. Death doesn't actually happen. It's just a belief. It's just a fear that people have because of our identification with the physical body, which does die. And so if death doesn't happen, then it means that you can afford to let go in the free fall. Why? Well, because there's no ground. If life is a free fall and there's no ground, you can let go and enjoy the ride. You can let go and enjoy the fall. You can learn to relax in the fall and appreciate the excitement and the adventure of the fall, and not knowing what's going to come as you're falling through this experience of being alive. But it's not going to happen by itself. You know, to have that experience of transcendental wisdom, to have that experience of being able to let go so that you can flow in life, so that you can float through life, so that you can be like a cat and land softly in any situation that you experience yourself in. It's going to take practice, because we've learned to be something that we're not. Our conditioning has taught us to be something that we're not. And that something that we're not is a pervasive reality that we find ourselves in. It's not just a reality. This is one of the things that makes this work difficult in a sense, or complicated in a sense, because I can say to you that, you know, you've learned a mistake. You've learned to believe that you're a physical body. You've learned to believe that you're a personality, and this simply isn't the case. And you can find out for yourself that this isn't the case through practicing being aware and paying attention and seeing the difference between what's real and what's not real. However, we live in a world in which the agreement is that it is real. The agreement is that you are a physical body. The agreement is that you are a personality, and that's the way that people are trafficking in life. So it's complicated in the sense that as you discover the truth, you keep falling back into the patterns, you keep falling back into the mental process because of the fact that the world, the collective reality, is one in which that's what's true, not what you're experiencing, but what everybody believes. Not what you're experiencing, but what everybody thinks. Not what you're experiencing, but the way everybody behaves according to the reality that they think is the truth. And so, as the old saying says, that if you experience transcendental wisdom, you experience being in the world but not of the world. And yet, even though you're not of the world, you're still in the world, and you have to relate to the reality that is expressing itself in the world, which means that unless you're consistently practicing, you can't come out of the conditioned reality because it keeps repeating itself every day as you move around in your life, right? So unless you're practicing, you can't come out of that, and the thought process is consistent with that. So you have to really be able to pay attention consistently and use whatever is available to deal with this thinking activity that keeps pulling you into the identity that's not real, keeps pulling you into the identity of time and space and the way the world is. And in meditation, you know, we find it difficult to stay away from the thought activity because it's such a compulsive habit. You know, we've kind of related to it and learned to relate to it as a way of being. Thinking is a way of being. So if I ask you who you are, you tell me what you think, because your being, who you think you are, is who you think you're being. You think you're being who you think you are. So it's a conditioned way of being, and in order to come out of it, we've got to use all the tools available. And so formal meditation is a tool that we can sit and be still, and we can practice the power of our will and the power of our attention to move our attention out of the thinking activity to the awareness of the body breathing, with the idea that if we practice this over and over again, we will eventually start to reorient ourselves out of the thought process of identity to the reality and the experience of identity. And so meditation is a tool to do that. And yet a lot of people experience a lot of difficulty in practicing meditation because they say, I just keep finding myself thinking over and over again. Well, one of the things that TM uses to deal with that process is mantras. And one of the things I said in one of the classes recently is that it's confusing to deal with the idea of the thought process being a default reality that keeps torturing us with negative thoughts and fearful thoughts and so forth, or hopeful thoughts, which are just as bad as fearful thoughts, because we experience that we have an ability to think, that we can use our will to think what we choose to think, which is true to a degree, right? If I ask you to think a positive thought right now, like I am happy, you can generate that thought. Try it. You can generate that thought. You can willfully generate the thought, I am happy, and make the voice in your head say that thought, can't you? Yeah. So what that says is that it's not 100%. It's not 100% that the thought activity is in the default state. In other words, it's not 100% that the thought activity is running on automatic and using your past and your future to create thoughts that are not useful and create mind wandering and create, you know, all the rest of it that goes on when you're subjected to the thought process. And so if it's possible for you to generate thought, this is where the mantra comes in. So it's another technique of dealing with the automatic thought process, which means that when you go to sit in meditation, if you're finding it very difficult to keep coming back to staying as the awareness of the body breathing, if you're finding that very difficult over time, you don't seem to be making any progress in terms of being able to explore this awareness state, able to have this be more consistently occurring than the thinking activity. Then one way to deal with that is to use a mantra, right? Which is to, instead of the thought process generating the thinking activity, you generate the thinking activity. So instead of the thought process running on automatic, you come up with a phrase or a word that you generate. You use your will to produce that instead of the mind producing the automatic thinking that it would normally produce. So, you know, I was playing around with this in my practice, and I was looking at it thinking, what could I use as a mantra if I was going to use a mantra? And what came up for me was that statement from the Advaita Vedanta teachings that I like so much, right? Anybody remember what it is? Satchitananda, right? So you could just repeat that, right? When you're sitting in meditation, you know, just keep generating that thought, Satchitananda. Now, the reason I like that as a mantra is because it's saying existence, consciousness, bliss. That's a good, if I'm going to generate a thought, that's a good thought, because existence, consciousness, bliss is the truth. Why not generate a thought that's the truth? Keep producing the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. Now, of course, the truth is not a concept, so it's not actually the truth, but it's close. It's a facsimile of the truth. So as you're sitting there, relaxing the body, focusing attention on the breath, you could start to repeat a mantra. It could be one word. It could be a phrase that is meaningful to you, that's useful to you. At one point, I saw something on YouTube about Ram Dass's guru, and it said that somebody turned a tape recorder on near him when he was just sitting on his blanket, and so I thought, well, I wonder what they recorded. So I turned it on, and what was on the recording was he was saying, Ram, 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 Ram. The recording was an hour long, and that's what he was doing for that hour, just saying Ram, 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 Ram. He was using a mantra, right? So that just shows to go you that even a realized master like that has a mind, and that mind has a conditioned reality that will play. And so basically he was just cutting it off by replacing it with Ram, which was a sacred word for him, right? So this is another tool that you can use, and he was doing that all day long. He wasn't just doing that when he was practicing meditation, right? So this is another way that prayer can be used also, right? Because if you're praying, when you're praying, what are you doing, right? You're reciting words that have wisdom. You're reciting words that have truth. You're reciting words that have spiritual power, right? That's sacred power, right? So if you use that as a way of, instead of what the mind's doing, replace that with a spiritual message, with prayer, right? So these are tools that can be used, right? Why are we wanting to use these tools? We're wanting to use these tools to be able to retrain ourselves to be relaxed like a cat, so that as you go through your life, that you can land softly every day in your world, that you can move like a cat. Cat moves very softly, leaving no trace the way they move, right? So there's something to be learned from cats. I have a cat, and this cat, when we got this cat, he had obviously been owned by people that, I understand there were kids in the family, and they would chase the cat around, and the cat would run away and hide because he was afraid, right? So when we got the cat, that's all he did. He would just hide in the house in places and, run away whenever you tried to get near him. But we just, kept treating him gently and moving closer to him slowly. And now the cat, as soon as he sees us, comes up and wants to be touched and wants to be with us. So that just goes to show that cats, in many ways, are more flexible than human beings, because a lot of times when human beings get their feelings hurt or they're scared from something, they avoid it for the rest of their life. So be flexible like a cat, too, is another practice.
You kept talking about the practicing, but there are people who get the sudden awakening, right? That happens. It's rare, but that can happen, correct?
Yeah.
Like Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way that's explained by other teachers is that they were ripe. They were ripe. What does that mean? It means they may have, in Eckhart Tolle's case, his ripeness may have been a function of the fact that he was so done with life as life was occurring to him, right? That he was ripe for some transition, either to the transition of death or the transition of transcendence. And so it was the transition of transcendence in his case.
All right, so being a Christian, and now it's like, you know, the whole crucifixion's coming up in Easter. You know, I was thinking about how before Christ was crucified, he even asked God to spare him from death. And I think, well, if we're supposed to be so accepting, even Christ wasn't accepting of death, you know.
Well, even in the case of Eckhart Tolle, or even in the case of Ramana Maharshi, or even the case of Nisargadatta, in the case of anybody who is truly awake, one of the things they're awake about is that they better keep practicing. Because awake doesn't mean your brain's awake. Awake doesn't mean that the programming and the conditioning stops running, right? And that was the case for Jesus Christ on the cross, right? So his conditioned mind still played, Father, why have you forsaken me, right? But his presence to that and not following what that said allowed him to say after that, right? What?
Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Yeah, forgive the soldiers who are killing me, for they know not what they do, right? And my Father and I are one, right? So he'd had the transcendental experience, even though his mind attempted to play the resistance, right? And this is the example that Christ was demonstrating for us, that it's not about the fact that you're not going to have thoughts. I don't care how awake you are. It doesn't mean that your brain's going to be transcendental. So one of the expressions of being awake is to understand the nature of a human life and the nature of conditioning, so that you continue. Just like I said, Ram Dass's guru was a master. He was an awakened master. He was experiencing powerful psychological powers, and that he demonstrated, and he was expressing pure love all day long, right? And yet, even with that being the case, he had to deal with the fact that he had a mind and a brain just like the rest of humanity. So whether it's before awakening or after awakening, before awakening, the practice is to get yourself established as the truth of yourself, which is to be awake, to get yourself established as your true nature, right, which is to be the consciousness or the awareness that you are. And then after awakening, to keep practicing so that can become a consistent experience you're having of your life. So that you can, so you're practicing after awakening to allow yourself to be in free fall and relax. You're practicing that before and after. You're practicing it before awakening so that the experience of seeing the truth can occur by relaxing the body and calming the mind. So that the connection, the contact can be made with the reality of what you are. Having made the contact with that reality, unless you understand the necessity of continuing to practice, you'll fall out of grace again. You'll fall back in, you'll go back down the rabbit hole. That's why even if you look at people who understand the reality of what practice means and the importance of it in terms of realizing the possibility that exists. You take people like Keith Jarrett, one of my favorite jazz musicians, right? Or anybody like Miles Davis or any pro, sports player. They're practicing all day long. Even after they're considered to be one of the greatest, they're still practicing all day long. Keith Jarrett had a stroke, right, and lost the control of half of his body. And I saw a video on YouTube recently where he was being interviewed by another musician, one of the first interviews that he gave after he had the stroke, right? And guess what? He's sitting at the piano practicing with one hand. You see? So this is what the understanding makes available to us, that no matter what the limitations are that come your way in life, no matter what happens in your life, you never stop practicing the realization of your true nature. This is the thing that will make the difference. This is the thing that will make the difference when you have the experience of awakening, which, by the way, is not a big deal. Don't Don't get lost in the belief that it has to be some kind of miraculous, fireworks and all the rest of it. That's possible. But for most people, as far as I can tell these days, because there are more and more people talking about these things, for most people, as far as I can tell these days, who've had an experience of being awake to their true nature, it was gradual, or even if it was sudden, it was just, it doesn't have to be anything other than that. But having experienced that, having recognized that, having come to a direct connection to the reality of what you are, if after that you think you don't have to practice, well, that's evidence that you really weren't there. Because if you really were there, part of being there is to understand, okay, I'm aware and I know myself as this awareness, and now that I'm aware and I know myself as this awareness, what am I aware of? I'm aware of the ever-changing world. I'm aware of my ever-changing mental state. I'm aware of my ever-changing emotional state. I'm aware of my ever-changing physical state. And I'm paying attention to all of that so that I can continue to practice being aware of what is not changing. So that can be the orientation, that can be the experience I'm having of everything that is changing. And when you can have a consistent experience of that which doesn't change while everything is changing, you can be in the free fall and really enjoy it. Because if you're falling at the same rate as everything else that's falling, it's not as much fun as that you're not moving and everything else is falling. That makes it a lot more fun. So I highly recommend that.